My guest today is Emiliya Zhivotovskaya, and what you're listening to is a pre-recorded introduction to her and this episode because this woman's busy. She's a prolific creator. She's a teacher. She's the CEO and founder of the Flourishing Center. She's the creator of the Certification in Applied Positive Psychology program. She's the creator of the Bounce Back Better program, the Applied Positive Psychology coaching certification, the Flourishing Skills Group program, the IMMI program, the co-founder of the Positive Educator certification program, the creator of the PERMA V model, and the 5I Change Agent model. Now, I know you probably don't know what any of that means. You'd have to look into those things, and I will provide information for how you can look into Amelia and her work at the Flourishing Center. But I say all this to illustrate how, like I said, how busy she is. And I was just honored to be able to have her on the show. And she was only able to give me 45 minutes today before she had to move on to the next thing. But I thought, actually, I didn't just think. My last guest, Ellen, um, introduced me to Amelia, and that happens so much in the show. One guest leads me to another guest, and so on. I've said this before that this show is turning out to be almost like my own little. Of course, it's my own story, but I thought, oh, I'll do a podcast, and I'll talk about things that interest me, and it might help other people, or at least be interesting to other people. But what it's turning out to be is this mirror for me. Each guest, every time, says something that resonates with me deeply, and it's always very specific to the experience of my life at the current moment. Because what Amelia is talking about throughout the interview, as she gives her life story, is the skills she developed in learning to follow her own intuition, and how that can lead her to the next step in what her own evolution is. And I'm being very general with that. There's more details in the interview to come, but what she teaches is exactly the type of thing that I have been learning lately, and what my wife has been needing to hear, even my daughter needing to hear, in terms of how you can allow life to happen and to learn to see how life is always offering you experiences in which you could uncover your own purpose. And that's what the Flourishing Center is for. That's what it's teaching. That's what flourishing means. You find your purpose and you trust your intuition to lead you down the path, even if you can only see one or two steps ahead, and how your life can unfold and flourish from there, and give you the experience of having an, in general, happy life. I mean, what else do we want? What does anybody want? So I thought, wow, what a powerful thing to be doing. What a powerful message to have. What a powerful woman. And again, I was just honored to have her, and I didn't want to waste any of the time that I could use having her unpack her story and her point of view on the world with this intro. So I just did it separately. But what you'll have up next is Amelia giving her life story from the time she was a little girl in Kiev, Ukraine, how they immigrated to the United States, and everything that happened in between up to the point in which she and where she is now with the Flourishing Center. So I hope you enjoy this interview with uh, Emiliya Zhivotovskaya. So, Amelia, if you don't mind, would you take us through your story from the time that you were a little girl in Kiev to how you got to where you are today?
Thank you, Jake. Honored to. Gosh, not every day that you start to be like, from when I was born. Take us back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was born in Kiev, Ukraine, and in 1984. So right around the time of a lot of collapsing of the Soviet Union, and my family immigrated to America in 1990. So I was about five and a half. Yeah, a lot of fascinating things that I can recall from childhood. Kind of don't really think much of it until you find out and you kind of grow up afterwards and you start to connect dots like, oh, I was born 90 miles from Chernobyl and there was a there's a disaster that happened there. And when Chernobyl blew, I actually did have some memories of things that my parents never really talked too much about, but I remember seeing the sky being a weird shade of orange and purple and asking my mom what that was and why we were needing to leave where we lived for a couple of months and live in different places. And then also immigrating as Ukrainian Jews out out of Ukraine under while there was the fall of communism was definitely a life-changing event. My family just sort of said, we're going to be moving to America. You're going to learn a new language. And I was a little child, and I remember my parents teaching me things like the word alligator and crocodile or different words. And yeah, just the whole experience of that, which later I found out was the fall of communism and experiencing just what I think many people would refer to as my parents looking to chase the American dream to give their kids a better life. And so when my family came to New York and did what very many new American immigrants did. My parents took whatever jobs they could, leaving more prestigious academic based degrees and jobs in Ukraine to do whatever is needed to pay the bills and to be able to start to make money and provide for their family. My mom, who was a history teacher her whole life, started, took any work she could. She was cleaning apartments and houses, eventually sort of settled into a work as a counselor and eventually retired home. But my father, who was an engineer, a mathematician, a manager of lots of people in a big factory, became a livery car driver and started driving cars and sort of taking side work wherever he could, trying to like day trade during the day and drive a car at night to bring in cash flow. And that's what my family did. They just sort of did what they needed to do to get by, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. And then, so I think in terms of like events that make you, there's definitely looking back on the type of resiliency that families go through, and how much your upbringing influences you. And I think that for me, I just really got a strong work ethic from my family, this sense of strong determination to make it and to just figure out a way to get things done. But I think what you were pointing to, Jake, in my story might be more of the kind of the more traumatic life events that shape you as a person. When I was 14, I would say that was really a fundamental point in my life, not just because it's, when you're a teenager and you're sort of entering high school and all of the things that might actually normally happen for people, but it was also a year for me where my brother passed away. And it was a accident. My brother was a decade older than I, and he was swimming at night with his fiance and some friends, and his fiance started drowning, and my brother ran in to rescue her. And they were just kind of your average 20 something year olds on a hot summer night in Long Beach, New York, and most likely partying a little, most likely maybe drinking a little. And she started drowning, and my brother ran in to rescue her, and she survived, but he passed away. Along with one of the other women. So he kind of swam after his fiance, tried to save her. She got pushed up against the jetty, and then he swam in deeper after one of the other girls to see if he could rescue her, and they likely drowned each other. And so that was really pivotal. A lot of the work I do in teaching resilience and teaching people the concept of post traumatic growth and how do we grow through traumatic life events, that was definitely the way in which we describe what a trauma is. A trauma is often the thing that's like a chapter turner in your life. It's like my life before the accident, my life after the accident. Of course, we have other things that create chapters in our life, like my life before I got married, my life after I got married, my life before kids, my life after kids. Like those things like become chapter changers, but really so do life events that are traumatic like this. And so that was definitely my first real close encounter with the sense of what happens when we just face things that we can't explain. Why did this happen? And it in many ways influenced so much of my upbringing, my childhood, and also what put me into this place that I'm in now of helping other people build their own happiness and resilience, and really the focus on flourishing and teaching mind and body and spirit skills to people so that they can navigate their life better. Because when my brother passed away, my dad got got diagnosed with diabetes within a month of when my brother died. And my mom got diagnosed with ovarian cancer within 2 years of when my brother passed away. And my strong sense was, even though I was a child, there had to be a connection between the stress and the trauma of the loss to what my parents were going through with their health. So while it wasn't very much talked about, it was like intuitively I just sort of understood that this must be what's going on. And I was really lucky that I happened to be at a school that had a lot of great resources that I knew to take advantage of. So when my brother died, I started attending the bereavement group that was offered at my school. I kind of became close friends with the psychologists there. I think my passion for the mind and psychology must have actually been very present then. And I just started to take advantage of this gift that I had there. And I had never really worked with a psychologist or a therapist prior to that. And it was more group counseling than it was actual therapy. Although my parents put me into therapy for a very short period of time for like 1 or 2 sessions. And they told me that I needed to go in. And the reason I was going to the therapist was my parents had scheduled a cruise for myself and them, and they didn't get insurance on the cruise. And after my brother passed away, there was like no way we were going anywhere, but my parents couldn't get a refund on the cruise. So my only experience of actual therapy was my parents being like, here, you go to this thing. And I needed to tell the psychologist that I was now afraid of water and afraid of the ocean because of what happened. And that was my only experience. But what it actually does speak to is, I guess, how my parents perceived the idea of a psychologist or a therapist or talking about what happened or processing what needed to actually happen, because my parents didn't, and they didn't have those sort of tools, but I knew to seek them out in different places. And when I was doing bereavement group, I spent a year going almost every single Thursday. My friends would go to lunch and I would take my lunch and I would go to the bereavement group and sit with the counselors and sit with other students that had lost a parent or lost a friend or lost an uncle or lost a grandmother. And I very quickly understood that I could use this thing that happened to me as a way of also helping others. And so I remember after the first year, I kept going because I was able to sort of be like the spokesperson for, it's okay to go on with your life even when you've had this loss. You can take your sadness and you can take your grief with you. The grieving isn't necessarily a one and done. And there was something that was calling to me about being of service to other people, taking what I had experienced and sort of working it. And also at that same sort of pivotal time in my life, before my brother had died, I started working. My first job was when I was 13. I spent 6 months selling sneakers at a store called Incredible Feats, which I thought was a great name. And then 6 months after that job, I got my second job, which then led to a 12-year-long career where I actually worked as a party entertainer. So I got to be a dancer and a clown and all sorts of things at people's birthday parties and bar mitzvahs and weddings and block parties. And so I spent 12 years building out this really unique career where I got to, on the weekends, get paid to show up with my enthusiasm and with my energy and basically create experiences of fun and joy for people. And in many ways, that also factored into my story of what I do now and how I work with people, because my degree is in positive psychology, which back then used to be called the science of happiness. Now it's called the science of flourishing. And I knew that I was actually really quite good at making people happy. I brought the happy. I would actually have a trunk full of toys and balloons and all sorts of things that I would like pull out of my trunk, and I would show up to a person's barbecue or block party, and I would bring the joy, I would bring the play. And so when I came to the field of positive psychology, I wanted to explore, well, how do we help people be lastingly happier? Not just happier in short bursts. How do we actually build sustainable, authentic happiness and study things like resilience? And then so I did that throughout high school, paid my way through college, paid my way through graduate school with this side hustle of a career where I got to paid good money for doing things that I absolutely loved and just basically curating these experiences. But then also another thing that strongly influenced my high school and college years was the way in which my parents also processed the death of my brother. I don't think it was the stress of the loss that was the only thing that caused my parents to get sick, because we know it's a number of confounding factors that will impact what actually wakes up and maybe a dormant illness or predisposition. But I know that when my dad became a diabetic, it was just the immediate stress of the situation. And then 2 years after my brother died, my mother got diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And back then, as well as now, ovarian cancer is known for how aggressive it is. And usually people only live about like 6 to 8 months from when they get a diagnosis. And my mom lived for 10 years. And over the course of those 10 years, it was a brutal 10 years. It was filled with hysterectomies and chemotherapy for 3 full rounds from start to finish, and radiation and lots of surgeries, and being in remission and coming out of remission, and cancer spreading into her colon and getting her colon removed, and then having all sorts of, I'll spare you the gruesome details. I always knew that there was some way in which there was this mind body connection for my mom and the loss, that I was fascinated by why no one in the medical industry ever actually asked my mother. Only one doctor out of the probably hundreds that we encountered over the course of those 10 years, as part of her intake, they saw that her son was deceased. No one ever asked about the actual accident except one doctor, who looked at her and said that must have been really hard. And everyone else, it was just a disconnect. And I felt that literally the stress of it, my mother not knowing what to do with her emotions, not knowing how to cope, how to process, likely impacted both the having the illness, but also in some ways her numbing herself out and just pushing through. My mom was one of the most stubborn Aries women you would meet, and she fought to stay alive because, in her own words, a daughter needs a mother, and she wanted to stay alive so much. And so, 10 years long of that battle together really informed my interest in the mind body connection, and teaching people also tools for how to self care for themselves. Because a lot of the things I was learning or getting certifications and often were things that I wanted to do to be able to support my mother. In addition to my degree in positive psychology, I was studying energy work like Reiki, I was studying biofeedback, I was studying nutrition, I was studying laughter yoga. It was like, if there was a tool that was showing that it was boosting people's immune systems and it was helping people be healthier, I took an interest in it. And part of it was to help my mother cope with, like, nutrition, for example, for preventing the cancer from coming back, but then also taking my own health really seriously and wanting to know, how do I care for myself? I think when I was younger, there was this sense, oh, well, everything causes cancer, whatever, smoke this, eat that, whatever, lay out in the sun. But when you are so young and you come so close, so face to face with what cancer actually is, and what the treatment process is, and how much quality of life can be lost through the process, I was like, fuck cancer. Like, I want to know how to take care of myself. So my mom passed when I was 27, and my dad actually passed of COVID when I was 35. He was very early on into the pandemic. After the first, he died on March 30th of 2020. So I definitely have that part of my story, is learning how to metabolize and be resilient to a tremendous amount of grief, a tremendous amount of loss. But it also is what has taught me the skills that I work with people. And also, it very much put me onto a spiritual path, or an interest into that which is not just strictly psychology and science based, but also what is more esoteric. When my brother passed away, I had a series of people come into my life that were kind of mediums and intuitives, not anyone initially that I actually hired. There was a woman that I worked with as an entertainer, and her sister happened to be a medium. And we would be like prepping for a gig together, and all of a sudden she would say things and know things about my brother, that the hair on my body like rise up. Like, she would just know things I hadn't told her. Like, she'd point to my wrist and she said, he's happy you're wearing that. And she didn't know that I was wearing my brother's bracelet that had his name engraved on the inside. She would like tell me things that only he would have known. And so that was kind of like really fundamental of planting a seed that maybe there's more to life than what we just know and see. Kind of opens a portal to the idea of that which is esoteric, to that which is maybe other dimensional, and also how I coped with it, because I realized that I had no understanding of why did this happen. There's the usual things that trauma does to us. It's like, why him? why me? Why my parents? Why do bad things happen to good people? He didn't deserve this. My parents never did anything. If anything, they were always trying to help others. Why did this happen? And I intuitively did this and later learned that it's one of the practices and principles that we need to use to be resilient, which is take control of the story we're telling ourselves. So I had no answer for why this was happening, but the best I could do was to say to myself, I don't know why, but I'm going to trust that it was his time to go or that it was his decision to go. I had no way of proving that, but I understood that I either could keep an open loop in my brain of constantly feeling like a victim, making him out to be a victim, or I could tell a different story. And I knew that whether or not the story was true or not, it helped me feel differently. And when I was in college, I got exposed to an incredible mentor a teacher who I studied with for well over probably a half a decade throughout college. And what brought me into the field of positive psychology, Kumar Rao taught a course on spiritual and personal development that was available at my university. And he taught things like our thoughts create our reality. And he taught me about things like gratitude and the power of meditation and the power of the potential that we're spiritual beings in this physical embodiment. And a lot of that informed my coming to positive psychology because I was being exposed to spirituality and to self-help and I loved it. And I heard that people had a career as coaches and motivational speakers. And I was like, I don't know how people do that, but that's what I'm here to do. And what was cool was that because I already had this job as an entertainer, I didn't have to take like a traditional cubicle job, which all my other friends were doing when they graduated from high school or college or grad school. I was able to kind of start my own business and figure out. I don't know how people start careers as coaches or speakers, but I was able to follow that. And I also feel that the teachings that Sri Kumar Rao gave me just taught me how to follow myself, how to follow my intuition, how to trust that each of us have a path. And it's sort of like a Mario Brothers game when Mario's like seeing that there's no path ahead and you just sort of walk and the path sort of shows up as you go. And I also felt my brother as a spiritual being protecting me. Again, I couldn't prove it to be true, but I knew that thinking that to myself helped me feel like I couldn't fail. I might as well try it. So yeah, so I went and I got a degree in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. I was part of the second graduating class. So very early on into a field that had just started in 1998. And here I was, it was 2006. And I was entering one of the first degrees that ever existed in this field, and that's where my career in the study and practice of research based skills for flourishing and well being really got kicked off because I took what I learned there and felt so inspired to want to take these research based skills and tools and bring it to people. And I felt like with everything I was learning, I'm going, oh my gosh, why didn't I learn this earlier? And here I am, I'm still like 20 or 21 and I'm taking classes with people who are in their 50s and 60s and are going, oh my gosh, I wish I had learned this earlier. And so I took what I learned and I started coaching with people. I started speaking anywhere that people would listen. I was running meetups on happiness. I was speaking at local bookstores. I got certified to be a yoga teacher because I was interested in like the health and wellness piece as well. So I would teach at a yoga studio wherever I could congregate people. I started to just build the opportunity to share these skills and tools with people. I also, after many years of working with positive psychology and getting all sorts of certifications and coaching and other things, I went back and started a PhD in mind body medicine, which I'm on the very, very slow 10-year track with because I've been all but dissertation probably for like 4 years now. At some point, I will go back and finish the degree. It's just been very hard to build and sustain the Flourishing Center while also doing a doctorate at the same time. But one of the kind of, I think what I've been able to build through the Flourishing Center and really establish a name for myself in this work with has been one, the integration of mind body medicine and positive psychology, because when I entered into the field, it was still very much psychology is of the mind, and then everything else, medicine is of the body. And what I was doing both with yoga, what I saw with my parents, and what is true in the field now, very much accepted, is that it's not mind and body, it's mind body, they are one. But I got to be sort of early on in those conversations and advocating for that and teaching that to people. And then in 2012, I started one of the first positive psychology certification programs along with one of my colleagues from my university, and started to really focus on not just myself teaching and speaking and all these different things, but actually training practitioners to go out and do this themselves, to actually teach people how they go from having an interest in helping people to actually turning this into a profession, and then giving them a pathway from that profession into how do they actually go out and actually even create their own work in the world doing this. And back then, there really weren't any opportunities for people that wanted to be professionally in this field other than getting a degree or reading a whole bunch of journal articles and books, because there was just not a lot out there. There was a lot of self-help, a lot of pop psychology, but really positive psychology research based tools. It was like there's only two universities out there that were running degrees. And so I saw that there was this need, particularly for people who already had degrees, already were psychologists or therapists or had MBAs and all these other things, that a master's just wasn't in the cards for them. So I started to run training programs, and by where we are today, we are on our 116th cohort. We've trained over almost 2,000 practitioners in 54 countries over the past 13 years of that program. And so from there, just continue to run a lot of trainings and really listening to our students and what do they need in order to help get this work out there into the world. So that's a bit about my story. I can tell you all sorts of stuff in between. There were 5 sociopaths and 2 narcissists relationships in the middle of all of that. There was, helping my father through the pandemic, being there with him until the day he died. There was a 12-year stint with being bulimic from what happened just as the kind of natural outcome of being a child with so many things going on in my life and looking for control wherever I could find it. So there was healing myself from bulimia through positive psychology, through yoga, through prayer, through mindfulness. And then there's other things we could talk about, like plant medicine, which has been a big impact of my world over the past, I would say the past 4 years. So much has been influenced by that, to the programs we run in schools and all sorts of things. So I've blabbered for a while. I hope this is what you're hoping to
Thank
hear more of, is the journey, the story. But of course, within any of those, there's so many tributaries around this river that we can take.
Well, thank you. That was that was amazing. I was thinking something while you were speaking, but I already suspected this, but after hearing you talk, I'm just seeing you as, now I don't know if you align with this or not, but I do, and a lot of the shows do. This idea that before we incarnate at all, we have certain things that we plan a blueprint as a soul that are going to play out in our lives. And I just see you as someone who had this plan and you didn't squander a single opportunity, that you're nailing everything down and are just a great example for others. Do you feel that in any way? Not because you've said you kind of look back on things and say, well, that this happening to me led to this and it informed this and made me a better teacher to others, or able to hold space for others. Do you kind of feel that this all could have been something that you designed as a soul from that level yourself before you got here? Is that something that you entertain at all?
Yeah, I love that. I think have had that sense and had it very clearly and very strongly from when I was a child. I can remember when I was in elementary school, there is the Michael Jackson song "Heal the World, Make It a Better Place" came
Yeah.
out, and I'm pretty tone deaf. I kind of sound like a dying cat when I'm singing. It never changed. My father was very musical. I didn't get passed down to me, but third grade, front row of chorus, I am belting that song from the bottom of my heart, and I loved that song, and I was like, yes, this is what life is about, heal the world and make it a better place. And I was the kid that was like, for you and for me and tired, like I was so into it. And I so looking back, it's like I knew that. And even when I actually have these like very, my parents would tell me that when I was a wee baby girl still back in Ukraine, when adults ask you like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would literally like be in the stroller, and I would sort of say, a teacher. And then people would say, why do you want to be a teacher? And I just sort of said, I don't know, because my mom is a teacher. But then I remember I got into school, like elementary school, and I saw what teachers did, and I was like, oh, I don't want to be a teacher. And then, of course, years later, I realized, like, no, I'm a teacher. Like, I'm here to teach. And my friend Jonathan Fields has a really wonderful both book and questionnaire test like thing that people can take online. It's called your Sparketype, and it's a free quiz you could take. And what it does is it gives you language to describe what is your archetype, what type are you of the type of work that sparks joy in you. It also tells you the type of work that sucks your joy, sucks your energy. It's what gives you spark, it what takes your spark. So I'm very much, my Sparketype is what's called a sage, and I to teach, to inspire wisdom. And I definitely had that from childhood, this like clear sense of like this desire to make the world a better place. And it's like, if we're not doing that, if we're not leaving this place a little bit better when we leave it than when we came in, then what are we doing here? And so I do think that there was some aspect of that. And then I think that more than a sense of, oh, I pre planned this ahead of time, let me in the game coach kind of a thing, which I do ascribe to spiritually. I really do think that it was the spiritual connection to my brother. And this combined with what Sukumar Rao taught me about how our thoughts create our own reality, and sort of put me into a place of learning that to trust this thing called intuition. Because I was always really intuitive. I just kind of always thought that I was good at reading people, so much so that for my undergraduate degree, I was in the honors program. And so I did an honors thesis, and I wanted to study intuition. And now there's a lot of research studies on intuition and intuitive decision making. But back then, there really wasn't a lot of research out there. So what I did was I studied facial expressions, and I was trying to explain the idea of intuition through the lens of maybe it's my brain picking up on unconscious facial expressions and micro expressions and body language cues, because I was always really good at reading people, or good at kind of knowing things or feeling people. And so that was sort of my fascination with intuition. But I think what I learned was how to ground, and how to connect, and how to really listen, and how to trust that. And then of course later on you learn things about like human design. I remember the very first human design reading I had, my reader said, I've never met someone who's so matching, so aligned with what they're doing, with what their human design was or is. Like, like they're kind of like, you are doing exactly the thing. And now all I was able to say was, I'm grateful to my teachers that taught me how to trust, and how to follow that, and how to just keep putting that one foot in front of the other. As an entrepreneur, as a single woman living in New York City, parents, not alive. And even if my parents were alive, they couldn't like really do much for me to support me financially. Like everything I've built entirely from scratch. Heck, I didn't even think that I could take out a business loan until it was 10 years of being in business, where suddenly someone was like, well, you could just go to the bank and ask for a loan to like give you some more startup capital. And I was like, yeah, why didn't I ever think of that? And so it's just, being an entrepreneur can come with so much fear, because there's so much uncertainty. You have no clue what you're doing. And the more people you ask around what you should be doing, the more confused you get, because you're going to get so many different ideas. It really requires like deep trust. And so the sense of spiritual guidance, and the capacity to trust in this thing called intuition, to listen, to feel like I had this sort of spiritual presence of my brother that like has my back, that will help me. I think helped in that process. And then of course I can pathologize it as well, because there was definitely a sense of I don't know if you've ever seen the show or heard of Hamilton
Yes.
on Broadway. And
Yes.
so like the story of Alexander Hamilton, like, kind of working so hard, and, you write, and you're doing all of this. And I have always had this sense of being a generator in the human design. Like I have a lot of energy. I produced a lot. I create a lot. But I remember I once had a friend say to me something like, Amelia, it's like, do you have a mortality complex? Um, because you're constantly doing. And it was so funny because he said this to me, and I look at him and I'm like, my rational brain goes, no, I don't. I don't even know what a mortality complex is. And yet I'm crying. Like tears are like
Really?
strolling down my face as he says that. So I literally look at him. I'm like, I didn't think I did, but clearly there's something here because like my body just reacted. And then he said the words, "It's like you're living for two people." And that then sort of clicked because I do recall that as a child I kind of thought to myself, I'm going to do what my brother can't do. And I think I also took on the like, I'm going to be the perfect kid for my parents. I'm going to be two kids for them. And this sense of like working so hard, trying to make it, trying to get these skills out there, feeling the sense that there's so many people who are lost, so many people who don't have the skills for emotional regulation, for coping, for getting over the imposter syndrome, for dealing with their worries and just wanting to get this out there. But this whole sense of when you were like, you haven't wasted any time, I think that there was also this interesting, like I could pathologize it as well, that it could also be a trauma response of this part of me that was like, if I let him live through me, he never has to die, kind of a sense. And in some ways, just naming it, like it still kind of cheers me up a little bit, but just naming it, I think did sort of alleviate it a little bit. But, why we do the things that we do, we never know. But definitely my strong sense of faith, my faith in a benevolent universe, that God is in me, God is in you, God is everything. And that there is this benevolent force that's always guiding us. And if you ever go off path, it's okay. It'll just steer you back. It's like a GPS system. It'll put you back, but I think learning that from my teachers, my spiritual teachers at such a young age, I was like, well, fuck it. Why deter? Just if you stick to your intuition, you'll always be on the right path and don't have to veer off and come back.
So, wow. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at the clock because I know time's short, but you've said so much there that I wanted to comment on. How about this? Even though you've probably already answered it, what could you leave people with if, because you're doing so much for people, wanting and helping inspire people, help them see where their path could lead and how they could come to that. If you could leave them with just one thing that may just mean something to you, or one thing that could help them illuminate their own paths in life, what sort of message would you leave them with?
So the question is how to help people illuminate their paths. I think one of them is, oh, it's so hard to nail it down to one, but I'll see how I can share this concept. So there's a lot of research on the difference between meaning and purpose and the importance of both for our lives. Research shows that people who have that sense of meaning, feeling like they matter, that their life matters, they're more resilient, they have higher life satisfaction. It's one of these kind of fundamental things that we have as human beings. We all want to know that this wasn't for nothing, that we matter. And so tied into that is I would want to leave people with the message that they matter. What you do matters, that you are making an impact in the world every day, whether you know it or not, and being on the lookout for it and trusting that you can explore, how do I add even more value? How do I be of support is one piece. And that can be a source of driving our meaning and giving us that sense of what's my why? Like, why am I here? But then a related concept, which has to do with purpose, is also really important because I think a lot of people want that sense of, well, what is my purpose? And the word purpose and the word propose. And I love the photos behind you because I'm assuming that's your wife. And there's the little icon of the couple embracing. It just brings
Yes.
me so much joy. And then you guys embracing in that beautiful, beautiful moment. I'm sure there was a moment where you or she proposed, right? And the word pose and purpose is the root. It's in both of them. So your purpose is, what is my offering in the world? Just the same way when you propose, you're making an offering to someone. And what often happens with people is they're trying to find their purpose in life. They're searching for purpose. And when you hold to that nomenclature or those words of I'm searching for purpose, you're basically hinting at it being lost. Because if you're trying to find your keys, you're looking for your keys because you've lost them. When you can't find your phone, it's frustrating. Where is my phone? I need to find it. And so what happens is when people are trying to find this purpose or trying to find meaning in their life, it becomes more frustrating. And people can literally even get a diagnosis of purpose anxiety. It's the sense of anxiety you feel like you're somehow behind the ball, that you don't know what your purpose is, but you know you're supposed to have one. And what does work better is when people shift the language not from finding purpose, to uncovering purpose. It's like Viktor Frankl is a famous psychologist who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor and created this whole form of therapy that was focused on helping people make meaning out of their life and make sense of their life. And he would say that life offers you meaning every day. Like life is calling to you. It's wanting you. It's life wants something of you. It's your job to discover it and to uncover it. And so when people can move from trying to figure it out to trying to uncover that which is already there, we open ourselves up to being curious. And so even as you said, like if I've come in and I pre-paved my path, well, I can't prove that to be true. But does it make it a little bit easier for me to think of, okay, how do I get really curious around who am I and what do I love and how can I be of impact and look at it through that lens rather than trying to find it. And so in my work, I teach people that we have the capacity to make meaning of our life. We have to make our life meaningful. We have to make sense of what's happened in our past. We literally can invent ourselves. What do I want for my future? And then when it comes to your purpose, rather than trying to find your purpose in a job or being a parent or in a relationship, uncovering it through the lens of curiosity, like what's right there in front of me? What can I do to express myself that much more? So that would be my sort of 2 cents around how I would invite people to go about that process.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, I've said it multiple times before that this podcast, even though when I started it, it was kind of my, I guess you'd say, dream about it that I could help people. But what I'm finding is how much it serves me because I'm at a point in my life where your message is exactly what my wife, my daughter is dealing with right now. So thank you so much for that. Thank you again
Thank
for your
you.
time. I know how busy you must be, and it was an honor to have you.
Yeah, so such an honor, Jake, and thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for trusting and for listening to the call and picking up the phone. Not the call for this call, but just literally the call to be courageous. And courage is when your willingness to act is greater than your fear. Courage is not being fearless. There's no such thing as being fearless. If you're fearless, you're going to get hurt, or you're a psychopath where you actually can't feel. But when we're human, we get scared of the unknown. But when we are brave, when we are courageous, it's when our why is bigger than our yeah but or our what if. And so I celebrate your why and your calling and what you're doing around purpose in this world too.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Have a great
All
evening.
right. You too. Thanks, Jake. Bye.